Hey everybody, so here is the next one in my top 10 favorite films from each letter of the alphabet. Today doing the letter E. So this letter luckily was a little bit easier than some of the other ones that I've been doing lately. So here are my top 10 of the letter E. First up is Steven Spielberg's E.T. and this is kind of one of those where I think like myself, if you sort of grew up with the film, then it has a lot of special meaning for you. Next up is Tim Burton's Ed Wood, and that is probably one of my favorite, if maybe my actual favorite film on the making of a film, or at least the filmmaking process. Even though it's obviously a comedic view on how Ed Wood made his low-budget films, there's a lot of truth in it and a lot of humor, and it still has one of my favorite things that I think really showcases what it's like, not just as a filmmaker, but even I think just a creative type. Even though it is a fictional scene, actually never happened in real life, but I think it really showcases how artistic talent, at the end of the day, no matter what one side thinks of it and another side thinks of it, it's really the same. And that is when Ed Wood and Orson Welles meet and they're sort of swapping stories. And even though you have what is quote-unquote the worst director of all time and quote-unquote the best director of all time, and they both basically have almost the same problems. You know, if I'm watching Truffaut or I'm watching Umberto Lenzi, you know, it's both art to me. Speaking of which, the next one on the list actually almost kind of falls into the same realm a little bit, and that is Robert Rodriguez's El Mariachi, a film that actually was very influential on me because when I was in film school, it was the transitional period from the quote-unquote old way of filmmaking to the digital way. So most of my education was actually still the old actual film way, and then the digital one came sort of towards the end. But what was great about El Mariachi, even though it had come out years prior, was just the fact that he was a guy who, you know, did everything and made his own film, and I found that very inspiring. And that's something that I went out and I made sure I learned how to do everything so that I could make my own projects and not require such a massive crew of people, because if you can kind of do it yourself, even though you would be limited in some ways, a way for you to also not be stopped. You know, you can go out and you can do your thing. And I've done several film projects, you know, short films and a feature film, basically without a crew. So, well, thanks to El Mariachi. The next two on the list are related. So first up is Sam Raimi's Evil Dead. The first one that, to me, similar to El Mariachi in the fact that it was, you know, very low budget, and even though they did have a small crew, it was a crew that was made up basically of friends, and they all sort of did what they could with what they had. Even to this day, even though I've seen it like, you know, who knows how many times, like, it still has so many creepy moments. That was kind of his one true, I think, horror film, and I just love it. I just absolutely love it. And then the next one on the list is Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2, and it's one that actually the first time I saw it as a kid, because I loved Evil Dead so much, and when I rented Evil Dead 2, and I remember when I rented it, because it was like a Friday night, and I watched it, and I was like, yeah, it's okay, and then I watched it like the next day, and just absolutely loved it. It just goes to show you, now it's on, you know, my top 10 list here. Next up, we'll come to No Surprise, for any of you who have been watching my videos for a little bit, and also since I am wearing the shirt. And that is John Carpenter's Escape from New York, one of my top 5 favorite films of all time, so obviously it would be on this list. I gush about that film so much, so I will avoid repeating myself, but obviously it's one of my favorite films, so I'm sure a lot of you knew it was going to be on this list, and you would be right. Next up is John Boorman's Excalibur, about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and that whole story, and I just think it is so incredible. It's one of those I've watched so many times too, and one of the scripts I wrote, I borrowed an idea from Excalibur where every time the actual sword is on screen, or almost every time, there's sort of a green light that sort of gives it this sort of supernatural element. And I took that idea for this one script where this mystical dagger appears before a character, and I had it where it was glowing green, sort of inspired by what they did in Excalibur. So it's kind of cool how, you know, stuff like that sort of seeps into your own work. Next one was one I added last, and I was just like, yeah, I'll probably take it off. But I was like, the more I thought about it, I was like, no, actually, I want this one on the list, and that is David Cronenberg's Existence, which might surprise some of you, but I actually think Existence is one of his best films, and it's one I've watched so many times because I kind of felt almost like Videodrome, that it was ahead of its time, but even Videodrome at the time still found an audience, whereas Existence, I don't think has really fully found its audience yet. And I would really recommend checking it out, either if you haven't seen it or if you haven't seen it in a while. Especially now with the way games have progressed over the years, I really, really think it's one that I think a lot more people would appreciate now. And then the next two to finish off the list will probably surprise no one. So first up is William Friedkin's The Exorcist, which, I mean, what can I say about The Exorcist that I'm sure hasn't been said like over and over and over again by so many other people over the years. And yes, it still freaks me out to this very day. And then rounding out the top 10 is William Peter Blatty's Exorcist 3, which again, I think has really found an appreciation over the years. I've loved it ever since I first saw it. And I think as a follow-up to the original film, I think it's really amazing. And I think I've never compared it to the first one either, even though it is basically, in essence, a sequel, a direct sequel to it. By not comparing it, I was able to really, really love it even more. And here's an interesting little tidbit. I was going to take one of Brad Dourif's little speeches as the Gemini Killer and do it in an acting class. The only reason why I couldn't do it was only because it was just too long. But I came so close to doing it. So that's it. Those are my 10 picks for the letter E. Definitely let me know your picks. So keep an eye out for the letter F, which will be the next one. And that's a hard one. I actually have to go back and sort of revisit that list and kind of go through it because I know it's too long at the moment. And as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.